is to you all, you bright, shining, smiley people. Come to me. There he is. Oh, this daily, if you're watching it on YouTube or on the VOD, is occurring 30 minutes early today. 30 whole minutes early because of this guy. Ooh, this guy right here has something seeping from a wound on his paw. Yeah, he's not very well. He's not very well. So we have to go to the vets. Come on, get down now. Come on, buddy. Down you go. Yeah, good dog. We have to put him... He's got to go and see the vets, unfortunately. He got a cut like a week ago. We cleaned it up. Done all the good stuff, but... I think it's infected. I think it's infected, which is a shame. It's a shame. So I have to go to the vets. It's at 5 PM, unfortunately. So, as soon as Emma arrives, I'll be leaving. Not to say we're not going to have a daily. It's occurring 30 minutes early. There's an epidemic in WoW. I'm having a tank week. Something a lot of you have been asking for. When's this update coming for, like, prot warriors? When do I use shield barrier or shield block? When do I do this? When do I do that? When do I do this? What do I do now with my paladin? What do I do now with my blood DK? How do I death strike? How do I death strike? How do you death strike? I don't know. I don't get it. All these kind of things. How do you brewmaster? There's lots going on. All this kind of stuff has been happening. And we're in a good place in the middle of Mr. Pandaria to judge how the tanks are performing. How are things happening? A lot of people get really confused when they see the top tanks of the big guilds swapping around. Like Blood Legion, for instance, their main tank Rignaros, who of course is a great Blood DK, switched over to his monk for Lei Shen Heroic. Why did that happen? Are DKs rubbish? The shit, what's going on? What's happening here? Why was there no prop paladin in method skill of Lei Shen Heroic? What's going on? Surely it can be done. Paragon used a Feral Guardian Druid. So what's the big deal here? So we're having a tank week. I started yesterday by gearing and playing all my tanks to get them all ready. So I refreshed myself. How do I play them? Tanked some LFRs. And today I decided to do the Paladin and the Blood DK. Now, the epidemic. Last week we talked about the new scenarios, the heroic scenarios. In fact, we got further confirmation that there is probably not going to be any more 5-man content in World of Warcraft. Wasn't so much a confirmation, but it was alluded to. In a tweet from Mr. Ghostcrawler, when they said, is there going to be no more 5-man content? And they kind of said, wait and see. It wasn't a yes, it wasn't a no. Which indicates that the option is on the table that they're going to drop 5-mans completely in favour of scenarios. Not that bad a thing, really. Unless you're a tank. In which case, this is really bad. So we talked about the fact that this heroic scenarios, which is where the gear will come from, or any sort of worthwhile rewards are likely to come from our heroic scenarios in the future, and of course in the next patch, aren't very friendly towards tanks. In fact, tanks were a very big detriment to the group. They made it considerably worse. I spoke about this in a video on YouTube and on a daily. So I kind of put the idea in your head that going forward, we're really going to struggle to find good tanks. I mean, genuinely struggle. Now, I haven't tanked anything in a raid, proper raid environment, since Mr. Pandaria Beta, where I tanked all the tier 14 content, of course. I tanked it on the beta and had a fine old time, no big deal. Didn't spot anything particularly tricky going on there. Recently though, over the last couple of days, I have tanked a lot of LFRs and such. I have a pube in my mouth. You can only guess where it came from. It's Ben's. He's covered in pubes, it's okay. I ran into some predicaments. Some issues that are really worrying me about the future of tanking in this game, and perhaps they're trying to shift away from the tri-dynamic, the holy trinity of MMOs. If you don't know what this is, it's the healer, tank, DPS dynamic. It's called the holy trinity of MMOs. Some games have tried to remove it, like Star Wars The Old Republic attempted to do without such a thing. Still really had tank classes though, so it didn't work out that well. Other games have just gone with a straight up blast things in the face, mobs have random aggro, nothing really works along those lines kind of thing. Each man for himself. Kind of works, kind of not. Ghost is currently checking out Defiance, so he's going to give us some feedback on that on the web show and how that's working. But WoW is based on this Holy Trinity. Always has been. Always will be. Or will it? It always works. We expect to have tanks in our raids. We expect to have healers in our raids. Just as much as we expect to have DPS. Recently, what we've seen is that tanks have become effectively a DPS. Their DPS is considerably more while tanking than most DPS classes, in fact. Even now, we kind of presumed maybe this was an early expansion thing, but that has continued up with tanks doing successfully high amounts of damage. If you look at Lei Shen Heroic, you'll notice that the tanks are usually about 4th or 5th on the damage meter. Pretty crazy stuff. But this has also led to more problems, which is the epidemic I've run into. First of all, I have not met a good tank in the last 3 days. I mean even an averagely good tank. That really bothers me. I've run somewhere in the region of probably 13, 14 LFRs, varying difficulty. Everything besides Throne of Thunder, really. My tanks aren't quite Throne of Thunder. Every single fucking one of the other tanks that came along with me was a complete total arsehole and had no idea how to play. So I started thinking about this quite in depth. I mean, I literally was streaming yesterday and was pointing out, oh, this tank's doing this. Must be a one-off. Everybody has bad players in LFR. That's just the way it is. That is the main aim of LFR, is to allow either bad players or people with no time to go and do some form of group activity. It's not raiding. I want to point it out again for everybody, it's not raiding. It's a group activity. So I kind of thought maybe these were one-offs. Maybe I was having a bad day. Something along those lines. So today, the only 2 characters that couldn't do LFR were my Death Knight and my Paladin. So I geared them up. I thought, first day of doing all the tank stuff, I'm going to do those guys. Because you guys want to see something in a raid environment. So in I went, did my Paladin, did several LFRs. Horrific. Really, really bad. Awful, in fact. Some terrible players. I then went onto the Blood DK. Happened again. And again. And again. Awful, awful tanks. Really bad. Now, what was so bad about these tanks? Vengeance has created a monster. Vengeance and the ability for tanks to do successfully large amounts of damage has actually created monsters amongst new players. And even average players have gone completely off the rails. There were things going on in those dungeons that were a kickable offense in my guild. I'm serious. If the tanks performed like they did today, and yesterday for me, they would be kicked from my guild. I just wouldn't accept it. The fact that they can do DPS means that people actively try to fuck you over as a tank. And this now works into their gameplay. And they start doing really crazy things. Stupidly crazy things. And this isn't welcome to LFR. This isn't welcome to LFR, as someone said there. I actually asked about tank recruits because it started to really play on my mind. I asked guilds about their tank recruits. Same thing. This mentality is just widespread, like a disease, really, spreading throughout the tanks. Tanks do damage now. We like doing damage. It helps us. We look better. And as such, they build things into their gameplay that allow them to do more damage. They don't consider themselves tanks. And now guilds are already struggling to find new, good tanks because they don't have a place to learn. So we've got a lot to discuss here. Firstly, random taunting. Random taunting is one of the most rude and offensive things that another tank can do to another player in a raid, especially when they do it in a really bizarre way. Some tanks I've encountered over my time have figured that taunt is actually part of their tanking rotation. It's been a bad habit for a lot of players that have come to me in the past, is they build in taunt. So they might go Shield Slam, Revenge, Taunt. Shield Slam, Revenge, Taunt. Devastate, Revenge, Shield Slam, Taunt. And they actually build it successfully into their tanking rotation. What's happened now is tanks have realised that they can do a lot of damage. Fun, right? Damage is fun. What I found is that, quite simply, you'll be tanking something. Let's take the Stone Guard. This happened to me twice today. I would pull the Stone Guard, usually first, like I do. And in I go, and I tank the 2. And around 30%, I notice that the other tank is starting to taunt off me, randomly. Like 30%. So the boss has been killed from 100% to 30. And then suddenly he started to taunt off me. And I was like, whoa. Why would you do that? That's so strange. Why would you taunt at this level? We've been killing the boss for about 3 minutes now. Why would you start taunting? And these guys are just continuously taunting away from you. And it really starts to get aggravating. But it's not the end of the world. Then you move on to another boss. A boss that realistically is single tanked. So you go in. You're the bold tank. You pull first. And as soon as you get into position, the worst tanks who turn up later, this is the interesting thing, they turn up much later. Because they're not ready, they're kind of drooling, they're AFK, whatever. They stroll up to the boss, and then they taunt it off you. And if you taunt back, they taunt back again. And you get into this ridiculous war of tanks becoming taunting backwards and forwards. It was so bad that in some fights, the bosses became taunt immune. There was nothing I could do. They were taunt immune. Even ads were becoming taunt immune. If I was to pull successfully, a tank would join the group, move into position and start randomly taunting mobs off me at random percentages. Like where they were just doing nothing, they would taunt off me. And it became kind of a very frustrating thing for me, especially as I was trying to film me tanking. It became almost impossible, and I had to run so many LFRs to get footage to make a video, because I could almost not tank anything. It was really difficult for me to actually tank anything. Players would just run up randomly and start taunting off me. And then I would be like, I can't be arsed. I just cannot be bothered at all dealing with you because you're such a dick. I just cannot be fucking bothered having a taunt war with you. That's not what I want to show in a video. I don't want to show me taunt warring with some arsehole in LFR. So this continued on and started to get even more bizarre. Even more bizarre. To the point where trash, you would just be tanking it and it'd be nearly dead. I had people taunt off me for the first time ever at 5%. 5% left on a trash mob and they would taunt off me. And I would just be sat there and what do you think in that scenario? What is this guy probably... What are you thinking about? Why would you wait till like 5% and then just taunt a mob off me? Greed is a big thing, and vengeance has led to this. But we're running into a scenario now where there are just not good tanks coming through. This whole thing has come to a stop, much like what happened with the removal of 40-man and soon to be 25-man, as we probably move to 15-man in the next expansion, is we're going to see, again, these ideas that seem good on paper. Vengeance is a terrible, terrible design. It always has been. I don't know if any of you played pre-Vengeance, but Vengeance is horrifically bad design. Tanks doing DPS is horrifically bad design. Because this greed mentality that's generated from this is what causes this problem. People want to do damage now as tanks. They want to do it. Because they can. And they can do large amounts of damage. And it seems like a lot of fun. And they want to do this. But I say Vengeance is a terrible thing. Not purely because of the damage. Does anybody know what happens? You've got 2 tanks in a raid. Let's say, make it easy. Garajal the Spirit Binder, lots of trolls beforehand. You're tank number 1. Or tank number 2, I should say. Let's say I'm tank number 2. And tank number 1 runs in seconds before you. Seconds before you. And aggroes everything. What happens when he dies? What happens when he dies? It is almost physically impossible to pull aggro away from him again. You can't do it. You got no aggro. You can't do anything. They've almost removed all AoE taunts from the game. Besides mocking Banner, the Paladins can't do shit. Death Knights can't do shit. You can't do anything at all. It's the most bizarre situation from somebody who tanks during Vanilla and Burning Crusade that I've ever seen. You can't do anything. So I asked, well, I'm not going to say his name, but I spoke to a tank. And I said, what happens when blah, blah, blah pulls before you? He says, I don't do anything. I just AFK. It's pointless. He's unlikely to die because of the level of guild, but I can't do anything. It's impossible. The Vengeance just skyrockets. I cannot physically gain aggro. It's not possible. Even if I individually taunt mobs off him, his Vengeance is so high that his passive cleave out-aggroes me doing a full solid single target rotation on it. I can't do anything. I say, what happens when he dies? It's usually like a mass problem, because I can't get the aggro back. It's just not possible to do so. The way Vengeance is done is his threat is so high that I can't deal with this situation. There's nothing I can do. I cannot think of a good reason for Vengeance to exist. I can't. There is no reason for tanks to do substantial DPS. Never was a problem in the past. It's not a problem now. It doesn't need to exist. But now we have this scenario where you can't do anything as an off-tank. And that is horrifically bad. Not even if you're an off-tank. If you're the second tank and you are seconds behind the first tank, you can't do anything. Your entire role in the raid is neglected and useless. And that's horrible. Absolutely horrible. A good example is Heart of Fear. The first boss, the Blade Lord. Okay? So obviously one tank in general takes the ads, and the other tank takes the boss. I was tanking on my monk with a fellow streamer who was tanking the ads. My monk was under geared. I said, okay, you tank the ads, no problem at all. He went in and tanked the ads. I moved the boss close to him to initiate some cleave. This was a good 5 or 10 seconds after the pull. His spinning crane kick easily over-aggroed everything I had done to this boss. Easily. And I wasn't playing wrong, I just started noticing I was losing threat. And I had to move it away. This is crazy. So, the problem is, where are we going to get our tanks from? This is the question I want to put to you today. Where are we going to get our tanks from? Scenarios? No. Scenarios are not going to train our tanks. LFR? Absolutely not. I have never met some of the most disgusting people tanking. If they were overgeared, don't be afraid if they're barking orders at you the second you enter the dungeon. I had a guy constantly explain to me how to stand next to him during the Stone Guard before I'd even reached the boss. As I zoned in, I got pages of chat of this guy explaining to me what to do, and I approached him. Of course, he's full LFR, and he is a hero. He's a hero to all tank kind. He is a man that World of Warcraft should be thankful for to go in. I'm not mocking him, but this attitude is insane. Absolutely insane. It's crazy. And I would dread to have someone like that in my guild. I would hate that. Someone who feels this authoritative nature to just bestow upon me his knowledge and to revel me with his words of wisdom of how to stand still. You will stand still. And of course he went on to take every mob away. And I just can't be bothered. As an old school tank, which I am, I can't help. I have like 6 years of tanking under my belt. I have no interest in having a taunt fight with anybody in this game, ever. Ever. I have no interest in doing that. But we've got the scenarios coming. We've got these people who are hugely unprepared for actual raid tanking, moving into your guilds and coming into your guilds. And tanking is going to be a problem in the future if we continue down this path. It's going to be a major problem to the point where guilds will fall apart. It only takes a lack of a tank to stop a raid. If we do not have a tank, your raid is done. It's over. We can't do it. It's not like a DPS that we can probably pug. You don't want to pug a tank. You don't want to do that. It's like pugging healers. You don't really want to do that. Those are kind of more vital. And DPS that are bad, we can kind of see without us just dying over and over again or having crazy problems. Tanks are too important. As much as they have the ego, and they do. Some tanks have the ridiculous ego that they are God's gift to WoW. They are the minority requirement in a guild. You can have 7 DPS for 5 spots. You can have 8 or 9 DPS for 5 spots. You will not last with 4 tanks for 2 spots. It won't happen. Because they get frustrated, they feel entitled, and they want their raid spot. They want it desperately. But where are they going to come from? Where will we get our learning from? We're just breeding assholes. We're breeding complete motherfuckers. These guys were dicks. Massive, huge, enormous penises that I was playing with all the time. And I've never been as frustrated in LFR. I can wipe 6 or 7 times in an LFR and one boss. Doesn't bother me at all. I do not care. I genuinely do not care. Oh, we wiped on the Stone Guard, LFR. I don't care. I genuinely do not care. What I do care about is overwhelmingly bad manners that are now part of the game. And someone who can render you physically useless. These guys render you useless. Completely useless. But this is what we're breeding. This is what we're teaching these guys. They're top of the damage meter, if not close. They're doing a lot more than you because you can't really do shit. If you're an off-tank with no vengeance, you can't do a damn thing. You just stand around like a dick with your fucking penis in your hands doing nothing. Where are we getting these guys from? Where are our tanks going to come from? Certainly not if scenarios become the main thing. Tanks are useless there. They're actually worse. Terrible. Useless. You might as well use your dual spec and switch to DPS. It would be better than being a tank in there. It would be so much better than you being a tank. That is just a fact of it. This is heroic content. You would be better. Are we expecting that people only start learning to tank when they hit normal modes? It's not a great place to start learning to tank. The second you hit normal mode raiding, especially after you've leveled up, tanking as early levels. Any of you who've tanked or leveled as a tank know how ridiculous it is. You dominate all the damage. Again, procreating this idea that tanks are dominant DPSs, which is just bafflingly stupid. You don't have to try. One hit from a tank anywhere below level 90 on a mob is generally enough to hold aggro on it until it dies. That's just facts. I did it on my monk recently. I leveled my monk as brewmaster in a lot of dungeons. One hit was more than enough. More than enough. to hold aggro on it. I just touch it and I've got aggro until it dies. I can't lose aggro. It's done. All I did was sniff on it. I wiped my pubes across its face. It was done. So you don't learn as you level. Do you learn in 5-mans? Kind of do. Kind of do. You do kind of learn in 5-mans. That's why I like it when tanks send me 5-man content, because you deal with a lot of different situations. You deal with a variety of things going on. However, it's pretty noticeable to any of you who've leveled as tank, if you have 3 or 4 pieces of 463 gear, every single piece of 5-man content is instantly trivial to be on ridiculous levels. Absolutely, stupidly trivial. You cannot die. If you die in 5-man and you've had 4, maybe even 5 pieces of 463 gear, it's ridiculous. And I'm talking DPS gear, pretty much. If you're wearing plate DPS gear, leather, well, there is no difference in the leather, is there? Let's face facts. But if you have some 463 gear, you cannot die. It's almost impossible without some enormous fuck up. A seriously ridiculous fuck up. Doing it in greens feels like fun. Now all my tanks are LFR ready. All 5 of them can do all the LFRs. They're fine. It's ridiculous. You just can't die. I can't die on my paladin anymore. I have 3 pieces of LFR gear. I cannot die. It's as simple as that. Same with my DK. I cannot die. Everybody else dies. I can solo the boss. I'm not even fucking bothered. That's how quickly you out-level that content. It takes a day. Yesterday, my tanks couldn't do anything. Now they can do all the LFRs. They're fine. It took me less than a day, and that was 4, I think, 4 classes that I had to do. Only my druid could already do LFR. Not that this is important content by any means, but this is the example I'm giving you, is how quickly you out-level interesting content. The only place to learn is 5-mans, but you out-level it in less than a day. A couple of hours at best. A couple of hours of 5-man content as a tank, you're done. You're absolutely done. You don't need to do any more. You might have to do 1 or 2 to get a bit of item unless you just buy it from the auction house. So we're not going to learn it in scenarios. We're not going to learn it while leveling. We don't do enough 5-man content where we can actually do some tanking to learn anything. We certainly don't do it in scenarios, and we definitely do not do it in LFR, where essentially all the new tanks are playing as DPS. Where do we learn it? Where? Where do we learn to be a tank? I don't know. I have no idea. At no stage from rolling a new character to level 90, ready to do normal modes, do we practice tanking. We don't do it. Challenge modes? You're gonna do, that's a guild thing generally. There aren't that many pug challenge modes. I've seen people try, ends in crying usually. It's just not going on. Trial and error? Maybe, but are a lot of guilds gonna put up with that? I know, I've asked. Well, I've asked a limited number of guilds. I'm not saying 5. I asked 5 different guilds who I have friends in. 5 different guilds. All of them have just removed their tanks. They don't have time for trial and error. They don't have time. They just don't have that kind of time to teach someone the basics, let alone the advanced areas of tanking. Tanking is an important part of the game. It's a very important part, but we don't learn where to do it. And then it becomes tricky, because now we've got very unprepared people who are throwing into content we might already have cleared. Standard scenario. I don't like using the word scenario, it throws people off. Standard situation is you're doing normal mode content and your tank has to leave the guild for whatever reason. Life, he's a bit of a dick, he's leaving for a better guild, you're not good enough. Whatever reason it might be, so you bring in a new tank. And not only do you need to teach him the basics, but you also need to teach him how you do all these fights. Notoriously is the Stone Guard. Stone Guard is an incredibly simple mechanic for the tanks. It's incredibly simple. They don't have to do anything. They just have to watch the meters and taunt the right mob. It's really, really, really incredibly easy. Some guilds struggled with the Stone Guard still to this day. With all the gear available, they still struggle with the Stone Guard, and certainly on Stone Guard Heroic. Stone Guard is a great opening fight for tanks. Great opening fight. DPS, not really. Jasper Chains is about as hard as it gets in that fight. Healers, just making sure they deal with the appropriate abilities. Tanks, though, have to watch the meters and can taunt at the right time. When will we overload, buddies? And they fuck it up endlessly. They really, really fuck it up a lot. And new tanks, are you prepared to wipe 1,000,000 times on Stone Guard while you teach a guy who has just been used to spam taunting in LFR to being a DPS monster how to deal with an actual tanking mechanic? Not many guilds are prepared to do that. It takes a special kind of guild to be ready to do that. Because I wouldn't have the time. I would not have the time. And the only problem I have with this is going forward we'll have less and less tanks who are able to tank. and therefore raiding takes another major hit in the future. I'm talking over the next year, mid-next expansion. Mark my words, if we don't change this, we're going to have a major problem in the future with how raiding can be sustainable because we don't have any tanks that can do the content unless tanking becomes even more easy, which will be horrific for me because tanking is so dull right now. It really is one of the dullest aspects of the game that's going on right now. I'm confident in saying that. Every other role, well, the other two roles are just far more interesting than tanking right now. Tanking is trivial to the best. Stoneguard the Guild Crusher? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm genuinely worried that we're going to run into this. And to the point where guilds, if you do not say in your application that you tanked during at least Kata, if you tanked during Mists of Pandaria, people will stop thinking about recruiting you. It's not your fault. That's the thing. It's not your fault. We need to consider that. It is not your fault. If you started in Mists of Pandaria as a tank, you haven't, unless you've been a normal and heroic raider, of course. If you've just started tanking, there is nowhere for you to learn until you get into a guild how to play. And guilds will start banishing those people. It was the same in Kata with people who started in Wrath of the Lich King. If you think I'm being over the top about this, guilds would not take players who started to raid in Wrath of the Lich King. They wouldn't do it. In early Kata, if you were like, oh, I started in Wrath and I did this and this and this, they did not consider you. I know, I was on the teams that picked people who would join guilds. I was part of that team. We wouldn't consider you. Because the Wrath of the Lich King raiding was garbage. If you were like, oh, I killed Sarth, I killed Malagos, I did Nax, I did some Ulduar. Unless you were an outstanding raider who cleared everything on heroic, you wouldn't get a look in. And most people who started during that expansion obviously never got to the stage where they were doing heroic content and killing Arthas and getting Light of Dawn and so on and so forth. It didn't really happen. So therefore you had Wrath of the Lich King raiders, maybe nothing wrong with them, but they had never been through the sort of trials which we would expect to judge a good player. And tanking might go the same way because there's just no steps. Just think about it. You've got your leveling, useless. Hitting cap, 5-mans, okay. Only going to be doing it for a couple of hours. They have instant queues. Let's talk about the queues. It's a good point. 5-mans have instant queues. You're done in a couple of hours. You can gear a tank ready for LFR so quickly, and then you don't need 5-man content anymore. There is no new 5-man content. You don't need it. 2 hours was the maximum queue I had today. It was on my Blood Death Knight. It was on the 4th LFR I wanted to do on my Blood DK. 2 hours I was in the queue. I have no fathomable idea how that can happen, but I was in the LFR queue for 2 hours to the point where I had to ask people my real ID, which I hate doing for recording. I never want people who are from the stream. I generally want the worst players I can possibly get. It's true. It's why I don't invite people to 5-mans when I'm recording. If you check nearly every guide I've done, I am not with anybody. Very, very, very stupidly rarely Genji came along, purely because, you know, he's one of my closest friends and he wanted to come along, and that was it. So, other than that, I don't like taking guys from the channel. I don't like taking subscribers. I don't like doing that. I had to ask for healers. I was like, I cannot get in the queue as a tank. So obviously people are going in as DPS. So not only are they not learning to tank in LFR or trying, why would they? The queue as a DPS is considerably faster. Hell, you can queue as a healer and get really fast. People gearing up, especially now we can choose what loot we get. How obvious do you... How often do you think we will find Brewmasters, Paladins, Druids queuing as a healer with the loot selection set to Feral? It already happens in 5-mans. DPSers queue as tanks. It's the fastest way to do it. What's the fastest way to get your LFRs done? Queue as a healer, and now we can choose our loot specialization. I want Feral gear. I'm going to go in as a healer because my queues are like that, but I want my Feral gear. I'm going to go in as a Mistweaver, but I'm queuing for Brewmaster gear. Of course I am. They're going to do that. I would. If I'm going in as my warrior and I actually want to do something that isn't tank related, I will go in as a DPS. The only reason I will queue as a tank for LFR is because I need to film something. A normal, sane person would not queue as a tank if you can have the choice to go in faster and get tank loot. Why the fuck would you? Every single tank class would literally rather go, unless you were completely fucking crazy, go as a faster queue and still get the loot you want. I need some tanking loot. Well, I'm going to go as DPS or I'm going to go as healer. That's what I'm going to do. So again, we're not even tanking in LFR. This is what's going to happen. It's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. The queues for faster for tanks in Outland, 5 minutes tops. LFR, very rare you'll find that. Because, of course, LFR needs 17 DPSs compared to 2 tanks. A dramatic difference in numbers considering how many LFRs are running. For every 5 LFRs, that's only 10 tanks and way more, near 100 DPSs who've managed to get in at the same time. And healers, of course, are the rarity in general. In general, healers are the big rarity. I was sat at 4 out of 6 healers for 2 hours. It kept going to 5, then down to 4, as healers were probably being snatched from my queue to fill up other LFRs where healers had left. They're just being pulled away backwards and forwards. So it's a pretty crazy thing. I have a genuine worry about this. There's a lot of things going against tanks right now. And where does that leave the state of the game in the future is the big point of today. Vengeance is horrific. Vengeance doesn't promote any form of skill whatsoever. People don't need to know how to tank because of Vengeance. And then when that guy dies, you're just in a mess. You're just in a whole mess because AoE taunting's generally just disappeared. And we have this Vengeance. I cannot see why it's a good thing. I cannot see it. I know it's easier to balance, but that's not my fucking problem. It's really not my problem that it's easier to balance encounters because you count the tank as a DPSer. That's Blizzard's problem. That's what we pay them for. That's their fucking problem. It's really not a relevant part of it. It was never, ever an issue. As a tank who tanked from vanilla all the way till mid-Cataclysm, I can tell you now, doing damage didn't bother me in the fucking least. Because that wasn't why I was there. I was there to do threat. Proper threat, where I had to work and think about what I was doing and time cooldowns. And essentially do things that are just completely gone now. And Vengeance just fucks so many things up. To hear top tanks say our job is so stupidly easy, and if I'm slightly late or I'm first, then I get to tank something. If I'm slightly late, then I don't. I just AFK essentially and do terrible, terrible non-Vengeance DPS because that's all I can do. It's horrible. I can't see why anybody's tanking now. Why are you tanking right now? Why? I don't know. As somebody who loved tanking, thoroughly loved tanking. All my original stuff is from a tank point of view. All of it. I loved it. One of the first guides I ever did here was a warrior tank because I loved it so much. I did threat guides all across Warcraft movies. Hundreds of thousands of views on threat guides. I don't know why people are tanking now. What joy they get from it. I can't think of it. Is it a role you've been stuck in for a long time? And therefore that's what you do? Are you bored with it? What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing there? A lot of people saying heroic content. I'm talking to the heroic tanks. They don't do anything. They pop a cooldown at the appropriate time. Generally, they're all about raid cooldowns. Their personal cooldowns aren't anything. It's not heroic content that's tanking's harder. No, don't throw that at me. I've done harder, much harder content. I'm not saying that I have done Lei Shen heroic, but I've done every heroic encounter ever previously to Throne of Thunder. I've done it. I've done the hardest content in this game and dealt with it. It's not because of that. It's not because of that at all. It really isn't. I can't see the point. I do not see the point. I find tank fun, but I've been a prop pally since Burning Crusade. Again, I bring that up and I'm doing this video. Yeah, it calls out, if you, yeah, exactly, watching Skullfree stream, Skull Banner, Rallying Cry. That's it, Skull Banner, Demo Barrier, Rallying Cry. They're for raid cooldowns, Shield Wall when I feel low. Generally, that kind of thing. There's just nothing there for me. Some fights are good for tanks, I'm not doubting it whatsoever. Some tanks have told me. I have a lot of tanking friends, a lot of circles of friends who are tanks and still tank. This fight's really fun. Stone Guard's kind of fun, but then it got boring really quickly once they figured it out. That kind of thing's pretty interesting. So, yeah. I'm debating this. Is this role being removed? Maybe. Be interesting to see that. Is there anything where you say this guy's a really good tank anymore? Happens to me a lot. This is something I kind of miss and I wish you guys had. Not for ego's reasons for myself, but they definitely, because those moments stick out in my mind. As when you could maneuver things, you could quirk things, you could do things mechanically that different from showed a proper tank, a real tank. And Threat was a major part of that, in fact. Threat was a major part of that. And unfortunately, a lot of the playbase couldn't deal with that. But where does the role of the tank sit now? Where does that role live? So I'm pretty interested in that. Okay, it's 5:05. I think Emma's about to arrive. Do you have any questions? I want to see some feedback. Can you put it on YouTube and we'll talk about it tomorrow? I'm kind of really emotional about this one. It really, I do get involved in my WoW stuff. I'm doing tanking stuff all week. Okay, so there's Paladin stuff coming out tonight. Blood DK tomorrow. Prot Warrior Wednesday. Guardian Druid maybe Thursday, or one of the others, or Blood DK. I might save the Blood DK for Friday because you guys watching doing that. The Monday video, let's just call it the weekly video. It's coming up as soon as, probably Wednesday-ish now, I would have thought. I'm quite involved in my tanking right now. Which we did Dark Animus in one try with a new tank. That's sad. That's really sad. It's coming, it's coming. The Vanilla WoW's coming. It's coming. It's a big video. I've changed it from the... I was going to do vanilla raiding, but I'm doing vanilla overall. So it's pretty good. It might be a two-parter. I'm going to include some PvP in there, leveling, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to look back over vanilla and do a comprehensive review. Pretty good. Pretty good. I think this matters to Peach because it's kind of his main thing from TBC to Wrath. But actually from vanilla. Vanilla, TBC, Wrath. I've tanked in vanilla a little bit. I played off other people's tanks and I loved it more than healing. I was a priest in vanilla. But yeah, TBC especially and Wrath. It was important. DPS is important. Healing is always important. Tanking feels unimportant now. It feels like a useless thing. And in fact, nothing in the game encourages it. I would like to see your thoughts on what you think encourages tanking right now. Because I can't think of any. I can't think of anything that encourages you to be a good tank. DPS is passively encouraged. Being higher on the meters is just passively put in your mind. The higher you are, the better you feel. Healing, you generally do really well. Healers have generally a certain type of mentality. I can't see what encourages you to be a good tank right now. I can't see it. Okay. Alright, guy. Have a good day. I'm going to go see to Ben. Hopefully he's fine. I'll put something on Facebook to let you know for those of you watching the stream. Thank you so much for tuning in early, guys. Really thank you for tuning in early. It is 5 o'clock, so I assume most people are coming now. We did start the daily 30 minutes early today. I'm going to the vets with Ben. Ben's got looks like an infected paw. Don't worry. I'm sure he's fine. He probably needs to put some cream on it or something like that. But thank you so much. I really want to see your response to this one. I want to talk about it again tomorrow. Okay, I want to talk about this tomorrow because it really hits home with me. I have not had fun in the last 2 days in WoW. That really upsets me. It does. Either dealing with arseholes or just the lack of fun in general. I really want to see your thoughts on this. Please post your comments on YouTube. It's not been a big Q&A. We'll do a big Q&A tomorrow to get some feedback and some discussion going. Alright guys, be good. I'll see you tomorrow, 5 PM. And Paladin video won't be up for like 3 hours or something. I'm going to go to the vet and then upload it. Okay? Take it easy, ballers. Have a great day.